Thank you very much. The next speaker that we have is Khairil Yusof from Sinar project. He'll be speaking on how open data can be improved and be better utilized in Malaysia by members of the civil society.
We work with actually open government data, and this is a little bit about us. We're often referred to as open data and so on, but more specifically, we're actually a parliamentary monitoring organization. So we're actually interested in, what our politicians are, who our MPs are, what bills are being passed, what votes and motions they're voting on, and basically trying to make Parliament more open. And we're using technology for this. So basically, we're using technology, open data to make Malaysian government transparent and accountable. So our focus is mostly to get to open government and make them more accountable. In light of this, we're actually supporting this set of standards called the Declaration on Parliamentary Openness. So it's like a subset of open government, specifically to get parliaments to open up, get the bills online, find out who our MPs are, what did they vote for, and so on. So I'll give a brief summary of civil society. We have extremely limited resources, especially here in Malaysia. And we also have a lack of government transparency. So things related to trying to get government information is often really hard. So therefore, data acquired is costly in terms of the amount of resources that we have, and extremely precious. Like every little piece of information that we can get matters a lot. So one of the ways that we had to learn was, okay, so given that data is so precious and so hard to come by with the limited resources of CSOs, how can we gather all these resources and make use of them in a standard way so that we can collaborate with the different NGOs to collect all the data together? So what we use is actually, it's called Popular Standards. It's a set of international open government data standards. It's developed by us here at Sinar with James North from Open North, Sunlight Foundation, My Society from UK. So we're all collaborating on this to make a set of simple open data standards for government that we can all use to build our applications. So it's a small subset of standards. So basically it covers people and organizations, usually with a view to model our politicians, MPs, which parties they're from, legislative assemblies, and so on. Geography, more specifically electoral and administrative boundaries, motions and voting. We work with My Society UK really closely because our systems are so similar. So things like Hansard, parliamentary bills and so on match almost one-to-one most of the time. So we work closely with them. Events, speeches, and so on. So it's a bit small, but basically we're working with a whole lot of different components internationally to build these things, and we reuse different parts. So I'm just going to quick overview on this, because I'm actually going to narrow on just a specific part. It's not that sharp, but as an example of how valuable data is, we don't have administrative GIS boundaries in Malaysia in an open data format. So what this means is that if you're trying to build a local council application, for example, to find out a pothole, which local government council with the open data for that is not available. You'll actually have to go to the local councils and actually draw the maps. So for us, we wanted to know our MP's constituency. So we actually had to work with Tindak Malaysia, who is working on electoral delineation. And we asked them to share their data with us so that we could have open data for all the electoral boundaries. And I'd just like to stress, it's an extremely costly process. They basically have to go to all the different electoral offices. Sometimes they won't even give the maps to you. You'll actually have to go to the state offices themselves to get the maps. Then they had to manually trace all the different apps to make it in a digital format. So we worked with them and put it on a Mapit service, which is again developed by My Society UK, so that now you can actually look up easily for developers all the electoral boundaries in Malaysia. We have every single electoral boundary for Parliament, done, and we're now in the process of starting to map and make available all the digital boundaries for local councils. And because of their work, we're able to do other things like Fix My Street adoption for Malaysia, where we could use the boundaries for example, Subang Jaya, to actually look up where local council issues are in terms of the boundaries. And most specifically for us, we're building a single database of all the politicians and organizations in Malaysia. So at this moment, so all the different NGOs, they're all collecting data on all our different politicians. Some of it is from government sources, some of it are from surveys. We're putting it all into one set of standards that anybody can reuse. And at this stage, I think we have about 4,000 politicians, about 900 or so organizations, and about 1,000 posts, I think, at this stage. This is posts that are held. So basically, this is what it is. It helps you create, use, and maintain lists of public figures in a structured open data format. So in Malaysia, the reason that we're using this is that politicians and businesses are connected. So in the UK, they had a more simpler theme. They're only going to model MPs because MPs are only parliamentarians usually. In Malaysia, politicians and MPs are also on corporate bodies. They're on different committees. They're on investment boards and whatnot. So we actually have to model all the different organizations that they're in. The second was that in a lot of more developed countries, after each election, they kind of throw away the data that they've collected because it's so easy to get. You have official resources. In Malaysia, it's hard to get this information. And second, the people are entrenched. They're the same people. So you got to kind of collect and build them together. You can't throw away all this data that you've collected. And then the third one is that there's no public declaration of assets of interest. So you can't just go find out, for example, all the posts that a politician has from their website. You're going to have to piece these things together. So here's an example of how we collaborate with the different. So Undi Malaysia, or MCCHR, Malaysian Constitution for Human Rights, I can't remember, and Constitution, they do MP surveys. So in their little MP surveys, they go to the parliamentarians and they collect data. What's their address, what's their phone number, what's their plan, what's their date of birth. Malaysia Kini, for example, in order to make their website on elections, had a nice format of every political candidate from the last 3 elections. So they also had some information on politicians. And then we also have our own research interns also looking up different information for all the different MPs that we're doing for. So we collected it all together. I think we're about 60 surveys. I think about 30 MPs answered the surveys for Undi Malaysia. One of them's here now. Hi, I'm Kim. Malaysia Kini donated 4,000, their database of 4,000 politicians in a nice open data format to us. And we all put it together in one single database, which we made available for the public with a public API. So here's how limited resources of different NGOs collaborated together to share and build a pool of information. And then what's the most important thing about open data is reusability. If you noticed before, each of those NGOs, we had specific goals. You know, my MP was only interested in their surveys. But if you have something in an open data format, it opens the way to do things in a lot of different ways that you did not imagine for your original project. So here's an example. From all those surveys, we actually could create a website called My MP. So the same set of databases used to build a website for all the different MPs. We could use it for research. I'll share some statistics that we can do based on all the research. And we can also use it for transparency reasons. Since we've got all this database in organizations, we can put and see what positions our MP holds and what they do. So here's an example of a website. So for example, this MP, the information on the tweets, all their accounts is from our database. So we collected all their surveys, and we're now able to extract all the social media accounts of all the MPs. And now we can have an automated list of all MP Twitter's accounts. The picture there of my rep, actually, Wang Chen from Kelana Jaya, it's in our database. So in order for them to build a website of the MP, all they had to do was put in a little ID, and they get all the information, the photos from our project, the details of electorals, details from Malaysia Kini, and then their survey info all combined together to build a website of all the different MPs. which would not be possible. So they had a budget, I think, of only 5,000 ringgit. But they could build on our database, which cost a lot more, as well as the efforts of Malaysia Kini. So here's an example. You can't see it here, but because we've put it in an open data format, this would be I think, of use for Empower, because they do things with gender. We can now automatically extract, using open data, for example, how many women MPs are in Malaysia. And we can do this live, so every time there's a by-election or something, if we update the database, we can always get an up-to-date data. You can build instead of somebody researching every MP, we can just use the open data, and I can tell you immediately now there's 24 MPs in Malaysia that are women, and I can get a list, as well as all their contact numbers, if they're on Twitter, Facebook, and whatnot. Also, there's an example, I can get ages of our MPs and so on. So there's no need for a researcher to spend a month going through different reports. I can get you the median age of Malaysia or the number of women MPs like in seconds. Finally, this is the fun part, is that because we've got it all in a standard format and it's all in a structured format, we can use the data in different ways. So an example here is that we actually imported all the different people and organizations that we have and all the politicians, and we actually put it into what you call a network graph database. So we could now visualize the connections between all the different people and organizations that they're on. So for example, we can see what posts a politician holds and if he's related. So I'm actually going to do a live. So what you have here is the Ministry of Finance. So here we're using the popular standard to map all the organizations. So under the Ministry of Finance, there's some positions here. We have the Secretary General and what positions he holds. If we want to find out what he posts, all these are little bits of information. We don't have a complete information, but we could see, for example, what posts in other companies is he holding. So if I double click on it, see, these are all the things that he holds in. So he's a director on Tabung Haji. He's a chairman of Cyberview Board of Directors. I think that's a company. He's also on the KWAP, which is the Pensioners Fund. And I think that's because of him being the Secretary General of MOF. More fun. What else is in there? There's actually a company called Ministry of Finance Incorporated. This is where in Malaysia we have this problem where organizations and government is the same thing. So here we have a private company called Ministry of Information Incorporated, which owns Malaysian companies. So we can double click on that, and one of the companies that it owns is One Malaysia Development Berhad. You might have heard of it. So we can see, for example, in One Malaysia Development Berhad, all the different posts that we hold, all the different companies that they have, for example, Istan Perdana, say EDRA Global Energy, for example. So I can actually expand each one of them, but I'm just going to go through EDRA, for example. So under EDRA, we have a couple more. It actually owns, for example, PowerTech Energy. We can see who's on their board of directors. This is their management team. So let's look at the PowerTech board of directors. We'll know that this guy, Mark Ling, is the chief executive officer as well. Let's open up the board of directors. Ooh, here we go. We see that the ex-CEO of One Malaysia, of One MDB, is actually also on the board of directors. So these are all the connections that I didn't know before. We'll look at this guy. Do we have anything knowledge about him? We don't have any connections. Oh, he's with Yayasan Rakyat One Malaysia. So he's also on the board of PowerTech, which is a subsidiary of it. Let's look at Yayasan Rakyat One Malaysia. Whoa, I know this guy. Najib Tun Razak, he's our prime minister. So you can see that he is the chairman of the advisory board here. And he's on the same board of this Yayasan Rakyat One Malaysia, in which this person here is the chairman, and he's also on the board of PowerTech Energy. So I'm just going to expand one more before I complete my talk. Let's have some fun. Let's look at this guy called Hussaini. Who is he? He seems to be a board of director on 1MDB. Ooh, he's also the director of Falcon Private Bank. For those of you in the know, this is the link back to to the banking accounts that the WSJ revealed. I can expand everything more on this, but I'm just going to cut short. But this is the power of open data and how collaboration on bits of information from different pieces of people can build a picture, a more transparent picture. Originally, actually, to be honest, our goal was not to do this. Our goal was just to find out what positions MPs were holding. It just so happened that the little bits and pieces fit together. Okay, so I'm actually going to go back to my slide, and I'll try to wrap it up. Okay, then we do other open data stuff that is kind of related, but I'm just going to touch on briefly. For example, we reuse, again, this is our friends at My Society. As you can see, we're pretty tight. Yeah. Is that they built a platform called Reusability, which is basically right to know, an FOI platform. And we adapted this for Malaysia. And one of the good things about this platform is that you get to see a public can make a request to it, and then we can see all the different FOI requests. So we actually put this in place for Selangor to see what's been requested in Selangor. And then for the request that we already know, we actually convert it to open data. So you'll actually be able to find, for example, the CVs of every local councillor in Excel open data format in Malaysia because of an FOI request. And finally, one of the other things that we do is social audits. Once you have the data by the government, it empowers citizens. So if a government says, we're spending 20 million to build education for your school, now you now have a figure, 20 million. So now the other thing is that we go onto the ground and ask the local communities, where did you see 20 million spent in education in your area? So this empowers them to check against the government. So what's next? This is my final slide. Unfortunately, this is, well, My Society's been pretty helpful. Their funding direction has gone in a different place. They're still supporting us. We now have to build this, once that we've seen the power of open data for this use for countries like Malaysia, we're now building a better implementation of the standard to deal with more scenarios. We want to implement motions and standards. So we want to be able to implement the standards for motions so that we can know which MPs asked which questions, which motions were held, who answered which, and so on. We also wanted to do this one. Nobody's actually done this yet. This is an interesting one. Nobody's actually done a simplified popular standard of financial transaction and ownership standards. There's existing ones like XBRL and so on, which is way too complicated for resource lacking NGOs. So we're now in the process of working with Open Spending, and I think probably the people in Argentina to build a small subset of governance, financial transaction, and ownership standards. And we're also going to improve the person relationships. Just now what you saw was just persons and organization relationships. We need to build different sorts of relationships like family, power, and influence, which if we could add that to that graph with financial, that would be pretty awesome, but not yet. And finally, we wanted to make our own specific version of Puppet API for use cases of Malaysians that might not be the same thing as the international one, but it's on top of the existing one. Yep, so that's end for my talk, so thank you.